In this video, I paint an engine shed and complete the landscape around the ash pit. Hello everyone, welcome back aboard the night train for part 3 in this ongoing series on how to model a narrow gauge yard. Last time we built the platforms, painted up the water tower, and in terms of all the buildings, all that was left for me to do was the engine shed and the surrounding area. So, this is how I went about it. My engine shed of choice was a resin printed stone building available from MS Models. The kit came with separate doors but had roof support detailing already attached as part of the print. Thus, not much physical work needed doing to it. My first action was to paint over the building in a slate grey undercoat, as I did with my MS Models water tower kit. I did the outside first, and then the inside roof and walling, just in case I wanted to fit an LED inside the shed down the line. With brown Revell acrylic paint, I then set about picking out the detailed roof supports. Though with them set in place already, this proved a little fiddly to do in the tighter spots. As the shed was going to be set on a concreted area around the ash pit, I painted the foundations in a similarly coloured concrete grey using acrylic Tamiya paint. I then touched up any areas inside with slate grey wherever it was needed. While that dried, I set about painting the doors, opting for a Humbrol green to add another colour to the yard's furnishings. With the insides of the shed dry, I began adding some weathering powder to the inside of the roof, to simulate coal and ash residue that's built up from the firing of engines inside. On the outside, I used a wet brush and some light grey paint to add some mortar detailing between the stones. I spread the paint across while it was slightly runnier, and then wiped away any excess from the stone surface with a cloth. I repeated the process on each side. Next came the weathering on the outside, and just like on the inside, I painted a wet layer of Humbrol black weathering powder over the exterior, starting with the roof. I then did the same with the stone walls, wiping off any excess with a cloth until I got my desired effect. I left a heavier weathering effect on the line-facing side of the shed, where engines would run past multiple times a day and accidentally spray it with coal and ash. While the shed was being painted, I set about building up the area it would sit on using foam layers. I cut out pieces of the right size and glued down 2 layers, the top layer flush against the edges of the ash pit. The second layer though sat too high above the rails and impeded wagon wheels, so I took it up while it was still wet and replaced it with a top layer of card. The thinner card let me lay larger pieces that sloped down towards the lower levels of land and the base of the sleepers. With the card glued in place, I broke out my textured concrete paint and applied a few layers until I was happy with the coverage. Then it was on to more ballasting, filling in the gaps around the edge of the card and the rails to blend everything together. I've covered ballasting techniques extensively in my previous videos, so I'll avoid repeating it here. Before ballasting around where the water tower is situated, I drew a perimeter to ensure enough space was left for the tower to be glued down at a later point. With the ballast dried, I painted some oily grime over the concreted area around where the engine shed will be positioned, as well as around the base of the water tower. Back to the shed itself, and after painting on the door hinges in black, it was time to attach them. My difficulty was that the doors seemed to have bowed, despite them not being left near any heat or in direct sunlight, and as a result I found it quite tricky to get them to fit in the hinges. No matter what I tried with the plastic welding glue, I could just not get them aligned and to stay in place. Eventually, I gave up and went for something far less finessed but more adhesive, Yoo-hoo glue. Dabbing as little as I could onto the door hinges, I was then able to get these in position and to hold while I adjusted them. And with that, the shed was finished. And here is the shed in position on the layout, and it definitely looks the part atop the concreted area. The ballasting and weathering really helps tie it all into one cohesive scene. It looks right at home between the water tower and the platform, but it's a shame those doors have bowed and ruined the immersion somewhat. I guess I'll just have to write some headcanon about an engine pressing up against them a bit too hard, leaving the railway to rummage behind sofas for finances to replace them. Warping doors aside, this is a fine looking engine shed. So that's all of the main yard structures sorted, which means I can now move on to the more natural scenery. My next video will be covering making the rock face that is going at the back of the yard, for which I'll be using a different technique to the one I used for the underwater corner. After that, I can move on to getting some vegetation and a little bit more life into the yard, as it's a little bit bare on that front at the moment. To see that and much more from me, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the videos, and also ring that notification bell so you know exactly when my next video goes live. Apart from that, thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you in another video very soon. Take care.